Got a great interview for you guys. Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, he's been in Gaza and we want to know about his experiences there. So first, welcome.
Thank you for having me, man.
No problem. So Mo, let's first talk about your experience in Gaza, and then I want to go back and hear about your background, okay? So when were you there?
So I was there last year in June in 2024, and I was also there this year in March and April 2025. So I was there actually the night that the ceasefire broke, this particular time round, which was obviously quite a chaotic day. And I was also there in June last year when they rescued the 4 Israeli hostages, and they killed and murdered 1,400 and injured 1,400 people. So I was there for some of the worst mass casualty events of the war.
Yeah. So what kind of doctor are you?
I'm an emergency physician.
So there's a lot of work for you there.
There's a lot, and I'm a fluent Arabic speaker as well, which changes things. You know, because if you go there as a doctor and you don't speak Arabic, it's different when you do speak Arabic. You know, in a mass casualty event, you're getting all the families and they're pulling you left, right, and center to talk and deal with what's going on. And also as well, you get to understand what happened. They get to tell you what happened. And that really opened up my eyes to some of the atrocities that had happened in Gaza.
Yeah. So what did you expect going in?
You know, you've seen the images obviously on your phones and on your TV screens, and as you're scrolling through, you know, you get a glimpse of about 30 seconds and you see these like, you know, these decapitated children, these burns and limbs missing. But when you go to Gaza, you know, you're in the emergency room and you're there for 12 hours, 13 hours, dealing with that mass casualty, that one mass casualty event that took you 30 seconds to scroll on. When you're there, you're dealing with it for 17, 18 hours. You're watching people slowly die on the floor. You're watching them bleed out to death. You're watching maggots grow out of their wounds over the days while you're there. So, you know, for me, it became not just this thing that I would scroll past. It became this every day. I would see those people, that same person that you would scroll past. I saw them every single day, and I would see them deteriorate every single day until they died.
So when you see American politicians and some American media being callous and describing them as, you know, terrorists, and they voted for Hamas, so they have it coming, or it's not a big deal, and how about October 7th, etc. Not to say that October 7th wasn't important, but now Israel has done 60 October 7ths on Gaza. But you were there and you saw the kids dying and you saw the people dying and you saw what Israel did to them. So how do you feel when you see someone on TV trying to minimize it?
You know, I think you've got to take this a step back and you just got to look at the broader picture. You know, before this, they killed 1 million civilians in Iraq in an illegal war, in an unjustified war. They went to Afghanistan and committed war crimes. They starved with sanctions and killed 500,000 Iraqi babies in the 90s that the American Defense Secretary said was fine, was acceptable. So, you know, when you see all of this, especially growing up as an Arab and as a Muslim, you're not surprised that this is the way that they talk about you. They've justified the killing of people that look like you for decades. So, you know, to me, it's not a surprise, but it's always shocking, the gaslighting now. Because, you know, back then in the 90s and in the early 2000s, there wasn't social media available, but we're literally watching a genocide unfold in 4K. And I think that's what, you know, when you're there and you're watching, you know, like I've been interviewed with peers, but, you know, I said to him, I said, you know, you would sit there and you would say that you would have a moral quandary over what's going on. And I'm sat here in Gaza with women coming to the hospital with their children in plastic bags, whatever remained of them. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no moral quandary here. You can't incinerate and melt children and justify that in any kind of way. But this is what we're being told.
Yeah, so I view the American media and Western media overall as deeply complicit. That may be even more guilty than the politicians. Like, so the politicians have their agendas, and they, in America, legalized briberies allowed. So Israel can buy them, Qatar can buy them, any government can really, almost any government can buy them through citizens that favor them here in America, etc. Corporations buy them all the time, etc. But the media has less of an excuse. And in my lifetime, you know, I'm from Turkey originally, so I grew up Muslim. The American media has done nothing but characterize Muslims as terrorists. And so, like, when you in a weird way, this conflict in Gaza has humanized Muslims for Americans more than anything else I've ever seen in my lifetime. But pre this catastrophe, if I said, Muslims are human beings too, I'd get a wall of like, don't be ridiculous. You're being apologists for these terrorists, etc. And that thought didn't come out of nowhere, and that thought didn't just come out of right-wing media. It came out of mainstream media. So as a Muslim, how does that make you feel?
It doesn't really matter how it makes me feel. It's the reality that I care about. The reality is they're starving 1 million children in Gaza. They're starving 1 million Muslim children. So even though it's humanized us to the public, the policies remain the same. So, we have to move past rhetoric, because all we've received, even from the Biden administration, it would leak that, Biden called Netanyahu an asshole or this, that, and the other. And you think, oh, maybe there's some progress, but there never is. It's only the rhetoric that changes. So to me, as an Arab, as a Muslim, and I'm looking at this and I'm going, it doesn't matter to me if the rhetoric changes, because whether the rhetoric is pro-Arabs or anti-Arabs, they're still killing Arabs. And I think that's what we need to understand as a group, that it's until the rhetoric changes, until the actions change, we can't really pay too much attention to the rhetoric.
Yeah. So weren't you afraid for your life? I mean, I think it takes a lot of courage. Honestly, I don't know that I'd go to Gaza. No, I know I wouldn't go to Gaza. I mean, knowing what I've said, and since I'm in media, Israel would almost certainly execute me. Right. So, and they execute Americans all the time, and no one cares, right? Especially if they're Muslim American. But you went there, and they're bombing the hospitals. You've got family. Weren't you worried?
I remember when I was in the emergency room and we had a mass casualty event, and what I was doing was I was recording and sharing what was going on. And I remember this doctor came in, and it was an American doctor, and she said, "You're not allowed to film in here." And I stood in this pile of these children, these dead children, and I said, "And is this allowed? Is this allowed?" So we're not allowed to film what's going on, but they're allowed to kill these children. That's the rules that we're playing by. And because I was filming what was going on, these videos were getting millions of views around the world. And I was told while I was there that I need to leave Gaza. I was told that people were worried for my safety, because while I was there, they bombed the hospital that I was in. They bombed the UN safe house and killed international aid workers while I was there. They executed those paramedics and buried them alive while I was there. And they also burnt journalists alive in their tents while I was there. So there were many times where, I felt like my life was in danger, but I'm not gonna center myself on this. What we have to center is those kids in Gaza. We have to center those children in Gaza. That's what needs centering, not the way that I feel or whether I was in danger, because me being in danger is temporary. But what's happening in the Middle East, it's not just Gaza that's in danger. It's Lebanon that's being bombed every day. It's the incursions into Syria. It's Yemen that's being bombed. It's the pushing for a war in Iran now, where it's going to destabilize the whole region. This is what's going on. And we need to use every minute and every second of airtime to point that out, that this whole region is in danger. And unless we stop what's going on in Gaza, it will engulf the whole region.
So as you try to get that message out, my guess is that some of the folks that you talk to in media will say, well, I don't know, that sounds pretty anti-Semitic of you to say facts about Israel. I mean, your facts should shut up. Otherwise, that means you hate Jews. I mean, Israel is allowed to kill all those children, and you're not allowed to complain about it. And what do you mean that they're bombing Lebanon and Yemen and Syria? That's true, but you're not allowed to say it. It sounds like you're saying that they're starting the wars. In fact, of course, don't you apologize for Hamas, etc. So when that happens, and it's someone who's and obviously a propagandist for Israel pretending to be a reporter, how do you deal with it?
You just got to take a step back. At the end of the day, the truth is on our side. At the end of the day, things like Hamas, Hezbollah, all of these things, they wouldn't exist without the occupation, right? They were born out of the occupation. And I think when you center the occupation as the root cause of the problem, when you center the fact that it is an apartheid state, when you center the fact that the ICC and the ICJ and every human rights organization in the world pretty much, including Israeli's own human rights organizations, are all saying the same thing. The game has changed now. You know, the world is not believing the propaganda anymore. The world actually wants to listen to Palestinians. What's happened has humanized Palestinians and Arabs, and it's taken us to a different stratosphere now. Now we're able to sit down on tables, and you know, Donald Trump has come to Dearborn trying to get the Arab and the Muslim vote because it's become important now. Because Arabs have become politically active, because the Muslim vote now matters. And I think as we're moving on in time, these anti-Muslim, anti-Arab talking points are going to fade further and further away. That Republican congressman that, you know, I can't remember his name, you know, he's the one that talks about we should kill them all and all the rest of it.
Randy Fine.
Randy Fine.
Although it's probably 90% of Congress believes that.
But even him, he's becoming like a pariah even. You know, that rhetoric just doesn't fly anymore. Maybe 10 years ago he could have said that and it would be okay. But now people are looking at him and going, this is crazy. You can't talk like this anymore.
Well, I mean, there's a giant disconnect, right? Because you're right about that. And it's not just the Muslim vote, it's now people who are against genocide vote, which is gigantic. 92% of the Democratic voters say enough. We're against Israel's military actions. But of course, the disconnect is, we can get 92% of the voters on our side. We can get 98% of the voters on our side. But our politicians are corrupt. They're never going to listen to us. So it's not just Republicans, it's the Democrats too. And they will follow Israel's orders to the end of time.
They will.
So I don't know that you have an answer to that. I don't know that anybody's got an answer to that.
But you know, it's following the money, isn't it, right? But it's becoming now more and more expensive to be Israel, right? The amount of people that they have to pay off, the amount of influencers that they're paying, the amount of people that they're trying to silence, the amount of lawyers that they get on to other professionals to get them fired. You know, unions, you know, I speak about the UK and Australia, you know, the unions are unionizing and passing pro-Palestine motions like the plumbers, the nurses. And if you want to fight them, you know, you're going to fight them in Australia, the nurses union in Australia. You're going to fight that in the UK, in America. Are you going to fight all the nurses union? Are you going to fight the doctors unions? Are you going to fight teachers? Are you going to, you know, it's become too expensive. And it's the money that, you know, you always have to follow the money. And because now it's become too expensive and the cat's out the bag, everybody sees what's going on. That's why the apartheid system and the apartheid regime, just like South Africa, will fall, because it's too expensive to go on. The status quo can't stay there. But the question is when will it fall? When will things change? And that I don't know the answer to.
And so you've given me hope, actually. That's a good point, and one that most people don't make. But of course, soon Israel will come and go, well, I mean, you're giving us $4 billion a year for military assistance, and you give us $20 billion for this genocide. But you know what? We're running out of money for propaganda. So American taxpayers, you now have to give us billions of dollars for propaganda so we could brainwash you into believing that a genocide is awesome when Israel does it. So that's coming next. But anyways, you have another idea for how to help the children of Gaza. So tell me about that.
I mean, look, what I was shocked about when I went to Gaza, right? Obviously, it's not the targeted snipering of children. It's not the tanks running over pregnant women and crushing them to death. It wasn't the targeted strikes on lines of food, killing women and children. I mean, that was shocking enough. But what shocked me was the fact that nobody had a plan. You know, you would have an injured child that would come in and all of their family would be dead. And all we would do is fill out a form to say that we've got a new orphan in Gaza, like there are now tens of thousands of them. And there was no plan for what we would do with this child. There was no one to look after them. There was no supply of food for this child. There was no support for this child. And what we found was that actually there's not really a day after plan for Gaza. The day after plan for Gaza is send them to South Sudan or Libya or ethnically cleanse them. There isn't actually a plan of how do we rehabilitate 1 million children who are malnourished, who all have probably PTSD, who have the largest capita of child amputees in the world. What do we do about those children? And there wasn't a plan. And you know, when I left, I was like, right, we need to come up with a solution. And you know, we designed the plans for a pediatric hospital. And I've been traveling around the world trying to get support for this children's hospital. But what I want this is, I don't want this to be an NGO led, because the NGOs are the ones that are being bombed. The NGOs are the ones that are being blocked from going in. The UN is also blocked from going in. So the only way that we can do this is if we get Israel's allies to come together to deal with the healthcare system, in Gaza and deal with the collapse of it. And these governments aren't going to move an inch. So we have to present to them the idea, and that's what we've been doing. And if I present to them the idea and say, this is how we save children in Gaza, and they say, no, we're not going to do that, then I'm going to turn around and say to them, well, if this is not a good idea, you come up with an idea. But you can't sit here with empty rhetoric and say, oh yeah, the children in Gaza are suffering, I feel awful, and not do anything. So look, even if they bring my hospital in or they don't bring my hospital in, the idea is that I've put this in front of them now. They either do it or they don't, but if they don't do it, they have to come up with their own answer. And we've managed to sit in front of, well, I've managed to sit in front of leaders of various countries, and I've managed to talk with foreign secretaries, and there's a lot of support for this. But the real support that we need is obviously the United States government, which is going to be difficult to do. But if you can appeal to the humanity, and I don't know how much humanity there is, but if you can appeal to the humanity and say, listen, this is a children's hospital, it's for children. It's not going to be treating Hamas fighters or whatever you say. It's going to be treating the children of Gaza. And I know, and you've seen Trump sometimes mention how it's upsetting him watching what's happening to these children. So look, maybe we can get this hospital in. But the idea of getting the hospital in, it's about breaking the medical siege of Gaza, because Gaza has been under siege for 20 years, not just the last 2 years. Before the war started, 40% of the children in Gaza had some form of malnutrition, right? 60% of them had PTSD. There was a medical blockade on Gaza. You couldn't get cancer treatment. You'd have to go to Jerusalem, and that would be on the clearance of Israelis, whether they liked you or not, or whether you had a family member that they didn't like, they wouldn't let you leave Gaza. So the blockade comes from everywhere. That's why I was there on the flotilla, supporting the guys on the Freedom Flotilla, because they were trying to break the naval blockade. I am trying to break the medical blockade. And we now have journalists all around the world coming together to try and break the media blockade on Gaza, demanding for journalists to get in. And when one of these dominoes fall, the rest of the dominoes will fall. And that's why it's really important that we all push together and we try and break the siege, whichever way it is. And I know, obviously with your journalism, that's one way of things, is breaking through the media and going on shows like Piers Morgan and going on all these different right-wing podcasts and getting the message across. That's coming through now. You're seeing right-wing analysts and pundits now arguing about whether they support Israel or not, and we're beginning to break things. We are watching now with these million children dying, and we're seeing now world governments come together and saying, we want to recognize the state of Palestine because of the starvation that we're seeing in Gaza. Things are beginning to change. I'm not saying that it's great, but things are beginning to change. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to present something to the governments that gives us a win on the board, because we need a win.
Yeah, so I want to ask you about the Democrats, but let me go through some of the things you said. Yes, for the folks at home who don't know, Israel was controlling the caloric intake of the people, of the citizens of Gaza, even before October 7th, because they are running a despotic military rule in Gaza and West Bank. American media tells you a half truth. They say Israel's a democracy. No, it's not. Israel's a democracy within Israel, and it's a military dictatorship for 5.5 million Palestinians who live in West Bank and Gaza Strip. So it is both of those things, and that military dictatorship is disgusting, despotic, tyrannical, and it has been tyrannical for 58 years, not just since October 7th. So now, though, of course, they've taken it up, not a notch, but 20 notches. So that brings us back to America. Look, I engaged with Piers Morgan, who I think is more in the middle, and a lot of the right-wing hosts, et cetera. Went on Patrick Bet-David's show, and argued with them on some of their hosts on Israel, and I can go on and on. And I'm gratified that we have moved a lot of right-wing voters, right? And we have moved a lot of the hosts, and we have moved the national conversation. We've moved a lot of young Republicans or a lot of young Trump voters. We moved Marjorie Taylor Greene. Tom Massey was already in the right place, right? So, but unfortunately, 98% of the Republican politicians will do anything Israel orders them to do, period. So that brings me to the Democrats. The Democrats talk a big game, and they don't want to actually cut funding to Israel because they're paid by Israel, okay, but paid by AIPAC and other Israeli lobbies. But they'll say, oh my God, I want to help the children of Gaza. I'm a humanitarian. I care so much about the Palestinians. I mean, I'm paying to murder them. I've sent them Israel a $20 billion check to make sure that they complete the genocide. But I care a lot about the Palestinians. So have you gone to them and say, well, if you care about, I mean, I'm not even asking you to cut aid to Israel. I'm not even asking you to defy your donors. I'm just asking you, can you help fund a children's hospital in Gaza? What do they say?
Well, look, it's my first time coming over to the States to talk to these governors, so we're going to meet a few of them hopefully in the next coming weeks. But I'll tell you what has been said to me in other countries. When I've went and met with British politicians, there's been a lot of closed door solidarity. They want to support you, but they're too scared themselves to talk. And I always say the same thing to them. I say, if you're scared to talk, what about me? I'm just a doctor. I'm just a kid. You are the politicians. You are the ones with the power. If you're scared to talk, what does that mean for the rest of us? And that's why, the pro-Palestine movement was never going to be about politicians. The pro-Palestine movement has always been a people's movement. It's always been people on the outside. It's always been people like the Young Turks, Mark Lamont Hill. It's always been these kind of people that have come to the front and led the way with this. And that's the way that we're going to come out of this. The Democrats, whether they like it or not, their base has moved. And if they don't want to move, their base is going to move without them. And that's what we're seeing now in the New York mayoral race with Zoran Mamdani, is that whether they endorse him, whether AIPAC Shakur endorses him or not, right, is moving. The Democrat Party is moving. And what they will find out, the hard way or the fast way, is they'll find out that it doesn't matter whether they take the money or they don't take the money, the Democratic base has moved on without them. And that's the reason why Trump won. It wasn't because he was so polarizing that people voted for him. It was because the Democratic base didn't turn up to vote for the Democrats.
Because they never deliver.
Because they never deliver. And not only do they not deliver, but they don't play the same game. And that's why, someone like Gavin Newsom right now in California, I mean, he's now leading the charge of potentially becoming the next, presidential nominee, because he's fighting fire with fire. And the Democrats don't do that. They believe in being cordial while someone is literally eroding the freedoms and the Constitution. And I think people are beginning to want to see action. And someone like Zoran Mamdani, who's constantly attacked in the Islamophobic rhetoric, and then he comes out and he just, they release a rap video on him. And all it does is it makes people sympathize with him more and love him more. And that's what's happening right now. And I think the Democratic Party, they have to make a real decision with themselves, because the train has left the station. And no matter how much money they do, no matter how much packaging they do, it's left. I mean, if you've got, that AIPAC Shakur line, that's now gonna be a thing now that he has to live with. And he's never gonna shake that off. And Zoran Mamdani, I think, won his district by 13 points. And he doesn't want to endorse him. It's over. It's over. The AIPAC within.
It's not over, but I hear you. Yeah, almost. And you're 100% right about the trend. So for those of you who don't know, Charlemagne the God, another ally of Young Turks, said Hakeem Jeffries is AIPAC Shakur. And he's of course right. That's all that Hakeem Jeffries cares about. That's all Richie Torres cares about. That's all Chuck Schumer cares about. That's all Joe Biden and Kamala Harris cared about. Oh, AIPAC, AIPAC, AIPAC. And number one donor for each of those politicians that I just named is AIPAC. Actually, Kamala Harris, I'm not positive about. They were the number one donor to her in 2024. Her career I haven't checked on, but the rest of them, their entire careers financed by AIPAC, including Joe Biden for decades. Okay, they're enormous liars. They're lying to you. Charlemagne is right. I'm glad Pierce is on our side now, and we've got momentum, right, in media, et cetera. So you're totally right about that. Now, the part where I am a little worried is, but I mean, like Gavin Newsom, right? So you're right, good fire with fire. I've been saying for 20 years straight on the Young Turks, for God's sake, fire with fire, right? So, but does he mean it? I mean, if Gavin Newsom says cut all funding to Israel, that means AIPAC is lost, okay? But I would be shocked. I'd like fall down unconscious in shock if Gavin Newsom or Pete Buttigieg said, cut funding to Israel.
Yeah.
So all they're going to do is talk a good game, then they're going to go back in, and he's going to be the new Apex Shakur.
Yeah, but that's the Democratic elite, right? That are talking like this still. But the Democrats that are coming up, the ones in the mayoral races, the ones that are running for like the mayor of New York, the councils, the ground level, the grassroots has completely changed. And like Zoran Mamdani has shown, is you don't need AIPAC money to win.
Yeah.
And
that's what they're most worried about, Mo.
Yeah.
They're like, wait a minute. You can win without AIPAC money? What if we spent a lot of AIPAC money to defeat you like we did Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush and Marie Newman and Andy Levin? Yeah. We could just eliminate we can't eliminate him? Yeah. That's why they're so angry.
They're so angry as well because like it doesn't matter now. He won, not just not taking AIPAC money, but actively saying that he's anti-Zionist, by actively saying that he would arrest Benjamin Netanyahu. And look, just to show you how the tide's changing, in Australia, we had our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, running against the opposition leader, which was Peter Dutton, who said that he would welcome Netanyahu here. He would roll out the red carpet for him. Not only did his party lose in a landslide, he actually lost his seat.
I love it.
It was one of the first times in history that that's ever happened, that the party running for prime minister not only lost the election, but lost his seat. And this is what I mean about the tide is beginning to change. And even though the elites right now aren't affected by it, what's happening is the party is moving on without them. And these new leaders that are coming through are not going to be swayed by AIPAC money. So, the clock and the countdown has already started for the Democratic elite. And that's why I'm hopeful. And even Israel within itself, Benjamin Netanyahu was on the PBD podcast, and he had a bit of a swing at Joe Biden, talking about how Joe Biden didn't support him enough, and how Trump is the one that's really supporting him. What that's signaling to the Democratic Party is that they will throw you under the bus and swing for the Republicans. So listen, what I would say to the Democrats is that they've already put their eggs in the Republican Party's baskets now. They're trying to move away from the Democrats while still controlling you as controlled opposition, and it's just not going to work anymore.
Yeah, so to the audience, I'll say, don't ever vote for anyone that takes AIPAC money. They're saying, I work for a foreign government, I don't work for you. Why would you agree to have a representative from Tel Aviv if you're in Cleveland or you're in Missouri? It makes no sense at all. They're like putting a flag in and going, I love it, I'm going to support Israel no matter what. And at this point, if they're taking any Israeli lobby money, that means they're pro-genocide. Why would you vote for anyone who's in favor of a genocide? What kind of a sick person would do that? Oh, right, nearly 90% of Congress. Okay, so last two things for you, Mo. So tell me about how can people support your hospital, or does it need to be a giant government? How can people help?
So, I mean, look, we're in the process now of negotiating with some major NGO organizations that will, hopefully run the hospital. And once we get them on board, then hopefully we'll bring the government on board as well, and we will make something of this. Well, this will be a hospital run by the people, for the people, with the protection guarantees and the logistical guarantees of these Western governments. That's what we're working on. People can follow me on Instagram, can follow me on Twitter and things like that. And like I said, we're making some progress. We've got the Irish government on board. We have got the British Foreign Secretary now committing to try and get a hospital into Gaza. And we've also in talks now with the Australian government as well. And we've managed to do that in a few short months with no money.
Yeah,
right.
And so that's great work, and we'll put the links down below in the description for everybody to check out. And God bless the Irish, and they know what it's like to be called terrorists when they're fighting an oppressive occupying power. So lastly, tell me a little bit about your background. Where are you from? Where's your family from?
So I'm a Palestinian refugee. I was born in Mecca. My father was born in Gaza. And my mum was born in Jordan, but she was a Palestinian refugee that was ethnically cleansed and lived in Jordan. I grew up in the UK, moved there when I was 4 years old, educated there, but then I moved to Australia 8 years ago. I've played professional rugby as well. I've competed in MMA and jiu-jitsu, and me going back to Gaza was the first time I'd ever been back home to Palestine, and the first time that I went home was during the war. And when I was there in Gaza, it was a pretty unique experience because I was at Nasser Hospital working all this mass casualty event, and I remember I got a tap on the shoulder, and I turned around because it was busy. I thought it was someone wanting help, and it was my cousin and my uncle, and it was the first time I'd ever seen them because of the blockade. And I remember we just hugged right in the middle of the hospital. It was the first time I'd ever seen them. I'd spoken to them on the phone. And I remember just thinking to myself, we have all these bodies on the floor, we have people bleeding out, we have people dying and screams. But there was this joyous moment that we had right in the middle. And that very much is the Palestinian story, is you live between hope and despair. Hope in the moment that we're in, but despair in what's happening around us. And I feel like the Palestinian people and the Palestinian struggle is opening the eyes of the world. And Palestine, they say Gaza is going to free the world. I really believe that. And I believe that one day people will look back at the Palestinian people and how resilient they were and how brave they were. And they'll remember the suffering that they went through to free them and to free their countries from, this political occupation that all these countries are going through. And that's going to be because of the Palestinian people and how brave and resilient they've been. So, proud of where I'm from, and I'm proud of the people.
Yeah, I've been saying on the show, Palestinians are the best people on earth. So I'm trying to counteract the propaganda that American media has overwhelmed American citizens with. Oh, terrorists, terrorists, terrorists. No, they took in Jews after the Holocaust. They took in Armenians after the Armenian genocide. The most warm, welcoming people, and the planet has, paid them back with terror and oppression, and they didn't deserve it. And God, I hope the world wakes up and get some humanity to help them. But look, I can't let you go without asking you about, because you mentioned it, your parents, that your dad was born in Gaza and your mom was a refugee. Because here in America, there's propaganda that in 1948, the Palestinians basically went for a picnic and never came back. The Israelis were just minding their own business in a kibbutz when all the evil Arabs attacked them. So was that the experience of your family?
My family's village was destroyed. It was burnt down. I had family members who were killed and tortured. We lost our homes. We lost our identity. My father growing up, living in that refugee camp in Gaza, the USA aid that's being cut off. They used to cut holes in the bottom of those USA aid rice bags, and my father used to wear them as trousers. That was his clothes. So, when we talk about, this was a land without a people for a people without a land, I'm the living proof that we were there. We've always been there. And, look, Jewish people might have a claim to the land, but so do Palestinians. And I think what people need to realize is that we're not going anywhere, and you need to learn to live with us side by side, and not just side by side, but you need to learn to live with us as equals. And really, that's the message of the Children's Hospital, is we need to bring back the humanity of these people. And the way to do that is to start with the children. At least let's humanize the children. And then eventually one day they might look at me, a Palestinian man, they might look at me as a human being,
Yeah, I hope to God that happens. I mean, it's such a bare minimum ask. So thank you for sharing your story. I think it's powerful, it's moving. I hope that people open up their eyes and see it. And by the way, I mean, I can't help but say one last thing, which is, no, they don't have a claim to that land. I think Israel exists. There's no way around it. It is what it is, and we're going to have to get a two-state solution. I'm not looking to get rid of Israel. But no, oh my God talked to me 2,500 years ago, so the Canaanites should have the land. It's absurd. It's absurd. I don't care if you think you're a Canaanite or a Jim Jablowski or an Israelite or whatever stupid thing you're claiming from like thousands of years ago. Oh, my rabbi talked to God. Sure he did, okay? I don't care. I don't care about your mythology. That doesn't give you any claim, and it doesn't allow you to massacre people and displace people and torture people and set up an apartheid state.
I want to be clear on that. It's a claim. It doesn't mean it's a very good claim, but there are people that have lived there now for 70, 80 years. We're not going to ethnically cleanse them.
No,
we're not. And that's what I meant. I meant that we're not choosing to ethnically cleanse people. But like what happened in apartheid South Africa, when equality comes, a lot of people leave because they live there because of the oppression, because of the superiority. But that's going to go away when we have a free Palestine. And that's what we're hoping for eventually one day.
Yeah, we're not asking to do anything bad to Israel. We're just asking to to free the Palestinians. And it is a deeply racist position to say that the Palestinians are the only people on earth who cannot govern themselves.
Yep.
To say that they are too violent to ever govern themselves is by definition a bigoted, racist point of view, and almost every Israeli supporter is racist and is bigoted when they say Palestine cannot exist.
And you know, the literacy rate in Gaza was higher than that in Israel. Palestinians produce more PhDs per capita than any other Arab country. My father who was born as a refugee, who used to study under candlelight, is the leading fertility specialist in the UK, used to go to school in a tent, right? This is what the potential is of the Palestinian people. Not only can these people govern themselves, but these people can do amazing things in the world. And that's what they're worried about. They're worried about that we go on there. Not only do we just free the world when they see what's happening in Gaza, but that we'll go on and we'll show what Palestinians are. And I think that's what scares them the most, is the potential that we have. And I believe that as a Palestinian. Maybe I'm biased, but you know, we've proven time and time again how resilient we are, how open we are, that when the world was killing and massacring Jews and the Americans and the British didn't want them to come as refugees, we took them in and they lived in our homes. When the Armenians were being massacred by Muslims, we still took them in. That's who we are, and they're scared. They're scared that if they gave us our freedom, we'd show the whole world who we are. And you know, whether they like it or not, we're here and we're gonna stay and we'll survive. And it might kill people in Gaza, but I'm still here, the descendants of people in Gaza, and there's many like me around the world, and we're here to stay. And we're gonna see a free Palestine in my lifetime, and I believe that.
It's a powerful story. Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, thank you for your great work. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, absolutely. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets its wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.